I was 3 boards into replacing a rotted dock section on Lake Simcoe when a silver SUV pulled up to the boat launch like it had taken a wrong exit off Highway 400. It sat there for a moment, engine running, and I figured it was a cottage owner coming to check on the work. Then the door opened. A woman stepped out in a camel blazer, white trousers, and leather boots that had no business being within 20 feet of a dock. She walked toward me with the kind of posture that comes from being told, from a young age, that rooms wait for you to enter them. My helper, Curtis, stopped drilling. The woman looked past him at me. "Are you Finn Calloway?" I had one knee on a wet plank and a pry bar in my hand. "Depends on what you broke." She stopped at the edge of the dock where the planks were still solid. "I'm Vivienne Holt." The name landed. In cottage country and in Toronto real estate circles, Holt meant something. Holt Cove Properties. Historic inn restorations along the Georgian Bay shoreline, a few registered heritage properties in Collingwood, and a lakefront lodge outside Parry Sound that people drove 3 hours to get married in. I stood up slowly. "What can I do for Holt Cove?" She took off her sunglasses and held them at her side. "I need a fiancé by Saturday." Curtis made a sound like he'd swallowed wrong. I looked at the lake. It was flat and gray and completely unhelpful. "You've got the wrong dock," I said. "I don't." She opened a slim leather folder she'd been holding against her chest. "I know you rebuilt the Muskoka Heritage Boathouse last spring. You did the slip restoration on the McAllister property in Gravenhurst. You turned down a contract with Nextbridge Development twice." I wiped my hands on my work pants. "They wanted to tear out original timber and pour concrete. I don't do that." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." I stepped off the damaged section and stood on solid dock. "Lady, I restore old wood. I don't do whatever this is." "This," she said, "is about the same thing." She opened the folder and turned it toward me. I didn't take it, but I could see the header. Holt Cove Properties, Trust Review, and a date 3 days away. "My grandfather built a hunting lodge in 1962, she said. "It's been in the family trust since. The trust has a partnership clause. If I don't appear at Saturday's review with a registered domestic partner, interim governance of Holt Cove passes to my uncle Reginald. He's already spoken to 3 developers. Not restoration developers. Demolition and rebuild. I knew about the Holt Lodge. Every heritage tradesperson in Ontario knew about it. Log construction, original stone fireplace, old-growth white pine throughout. The kind of building that took a generation to season into itself." "Why me?" I asked. Vivienne's jaw tightened slightly. 8 months ago, Reginald tried to acquire your boatyard property through a numbered company. You declined." I stayed still. "That was him." "Yeah, sis. He offered well above market rate. It was my father's yard. I know." I didn't like that she knew. I didn't like that she'd done the work before she drove up here. "You researched me," I said. "I had to." "No. You wanted to make sure I'd fit." "Yes," she said. "I needed someone who couldn't be bought, pressured, or impressed by a letterhead." I looked past her at Curtis, who was pretending to organize screws he didn't need to organize. There was no wind. The lake smelled like cold stone and early May. "What do I get?" I asked. "Compensation, legal protection, a clean agreement with no claim on your business or your property. Everything structured before, during, and after." "That's not what I meant," I said. She paused. For the first time since she'd stepped out of that SUV, she looked like she was standing on uncertain ground. "What did you mean?" "The truth," I said. "All of it, what Reginald has on you, what the real risk is, every part you left out because you thought it would make me say no." She looked at the water for a moment. When she spoke, her voice dropped. "My grandmother lived in that lodge year-round until she was 83, she said. She used to walk the perimeter every morning before anyone else woke up. She said the logs knew the seasons better than any weatherman. She died the year I took over Holt Cove. She never got to see what we did with the Collingwood properties." I waited. "Reginald thinks heritage is just a tax strategy," Vivienne said. He doesn't see what's in those buildings. He sees what they'd sell for in a hot market. My mother's whole life is in that lodge. The photographs, the records. The way it still smells like pine pitch in July. He would strip it in 6 weeks and pitch it to a luxury condo developer by August. The dock planks shifted lightly under our feet. Old wood always had something to say if you were quiet enough to hear it. I looked at Vivienne Holt, standing there in her unsuitable boots, holding a leather folder, like she'd been holding up something much heavier for a very long time. You understand that getting my name into your family situation could land on my business. Yes. My crew, 2 guys with families. Yes. And if this goes sideways, no one's going to say you picked me because I had integrity. They'll say you found someone easy to manage. Her chin moved once. I know that. I picked up the pry bar and set it on the dock box. All right, I said. She blinked. All right, I'll hear the full version. And if I say yes, there's one condition. Name it. Before I walk into your world, you walk into mine. My boatyard. Meet the people you're asking me to involve. She looked down at her boots, then at the dock, then at me. Fine. Not fine, I said. Actually fine. No performance, no town car face. You stand where I stand and see what's at stake for us. Then we talk about Saturday. Something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but the specific look of someone who has stopped performing composure and is simply present. All right, Finn Calloway. Curtis, behind her, said very quietly, What in the world? I ignored him. Vivienne glanced at her watch. I need to be back in Barrie by 4. I looked at the half-repaired dock, then at the sky. Of course you do. She started back toward the SUV, then stopped. Finn. Yeah. Bring your WSIB certificate and government ID. Gordon will need them for the filing. I looked out at the lake and let out a short laugh, because there was nothing else to do. 20 minutes ago, my biggest problem had been a cracked dock stringer, and the forecast calling for rain Thursday. Now Vivienne Holt needed a fiancé by Saturday, and I had somehow become the person standing closest to yes. I drove my own truck. Curtis sat in the passenger seat for the first 8 minutes of the drive to Barrie, saying nothing, then said, You know this is insane. I know. You literally just met her on a dock. I know. You're not even seeing anyone. Curtis. Right, he said. Right. The boatyard sat off a side road near the Barrie waterfront. Low building, cedar seating, a small yard with salvaged dock hardware, old outboard motors I was keeping for parts, and a faded sign my father had painted the year I was born. Shepard, my yard hand, came out of the workshop when the SUV pulled in behind my truck. He looked at the vehicle. He looked at me. He looked at Vivienne stepping out. He said, Did we get a grant? No, I said. This is Vivienne Holt. Shepard was 61 and had worked for my father before me. He took his time looking at her. You in some kind of trouble? He asked. Vivienne didn't flinch. Yes, she said. Shepard nodded once, slowly, like that was the only answer that mattered. Then Finn'll sort it. She looked at him for a moment, and I watched her take something in. No title, no folder, no due diligence. Just a man asking the only question he needed answered. I walked her through the shop. The planer was running in the back. 2 marine-grade cedar planks were clamped to the bench. Shepard's coffee had been sitting on the workbench since 7 in the morning and was well past drinkable. There were invoices under a magnet on the cabinet, a paper calendar with job dates circled in blue marker, and sawdust on everything. This is what goes into your story, I said. These guys pull long days. Shepard has a daughter starting at Lakehead in September. Curtis has a kid with a specialist appointment in Toronto every 6 weeks. If Reginald decides to make noise about me, it doesn't stop at my name. She looked at the workbench, then at the calendar. I understand. You're starting to, I said. She didn't argue. I respected that more than I wanted to. By early afternoon, I was in a small office in a law building off Dunlop Street, with a lawyer named Ms. Patel, who had clearly seen stranger things, but was not going to let that show. She walked me through every page of the agreement, with the speed of someone billing by the quarter hour and the precision of someone who took personal offense at loose language. Caroline waited in the corridor and did not once open the door to check. Vivienne? I reminded myself. Vivienne waited. You understand what you're agreeing to, Ms. Patel said. I got that. You also understand your business assets are fully protected under this structure. She showed me the section. Finn Calloway Marine Restoration, the boatyard property, the equipment. All of it ring-fenced before the filing. You're protecting me pretty thoroughly for someone who only needs a name on a document, I said. Ms. Patel looked up over her reading glasses. I protect you because my client asked me to. And because she was clear that she wanted a partner, not a liability. That stayed with me. We drove to the Service Ontario office in the afternoon. No decorations. No witnesses beyond the lawyers. A registration clerk who'd seen everything and was not moved by any of it. Vivienne and I stood side by side at the counter with our identification on the laminate surface. And I thought, 12 hours ago I was pulling nails out of a dock on Lake Simcoe. The clerk asked if we had a ring. Vivienne went still. Gordon, her lawyer, shifted behind her. I reached into the front pocket of my jacket. My father had given me his dive watch. When I turned 30, told me to keep it on me because a man should always know what time it is. I'd dropped it in my pocket that morning out of habit. It wasn't a ring, but I pulled out the only thing I had. On my keychain, next to my boatyard keys, was a small brass compass my father had carried on every job site. It wasn't worth anything to anyone who didn't know. It was worth everything to me. I looked at Vivienne. Not exactly traditional, I said. She looked at the compass, then at me. Her hand was steady when she reached for it, but her fingers pressed around it for a second longer than necessary before she set it on the counter for the clerk. After the filing, she handed it back to me without being asked. I put it in my pocket. The trust review was held Saturday at 10 in the morning in a conference room at a Barrie law firm, with views of Kempenfelt Bay. Reginald Holt was already seated when we arrived. He was mid-50s, the kind of groomed that suggested he'd never had to be somewhere at 7 in the morning for any reason involving physical labor. His eyes moved over me like he was assessing a vehicle with visible rust. Vivienne, he said. This is creative even for you. She set the registration documents on the table. The clause is satisfied. Reginald's mouth shifted into a shape that didn't quite become a smile. You registered a domestic partnership with a dockworker? Restoration contractor, I said. The room held. Reginald looked at me directly for the first time. I'm sorry, restoration contractor, I said again. If you're going to be dismissive, at least be accurate. One of the trust officers, an older woman named Mrs. Brennan, looked down at the table very quickly. Reginald leaned back in his chair. And what did she offer you, Mr. Calloway? Nothing that would mean anything to you. Everything means something to someone if the number's right. Then you must be simple to understand. Vivienne touched my forearm under the table. I stopped. Gordon stepped in with the documentation. Mrs. Brennan reviewed the registration, the trust clause language, the timeline. Reginald stared at Vivienne the entire time. You've made a spectacle of your grandfather's legacy, he said. She kept her voice flat. No, I kept you from selling it to a prefab developer by Tuesday. That landed. Mrs. Brennan set down the papers. The condition has been satisfied. Governance of the Holt Cove Trust remains with Vivienne Holt pending the full annual review. Reginald stood and buttoned his jacket. Enjoy the arrangement, he said, looking at me. I looked back at him. Enjoy the outcome. Vivienne's grip on my forearm tightened once under the table. Reginald left without stopping. For about 4 minutes, I thought we were done. Then Vivienne's phone lit up. Then Gordon's. Then, Mrs. Brennan's assistant came in with a face that said the next thing he was about to say was going to be no one's favorite news. Vivienne looked at her screen. She held it toward me without speaking. It was a post on a local real estate gossip account. My name, her name, and the words, "Insider sources question legitimacy of Holt Cove partnership registration." "Reginald," she said quietly. There were people with phones gathering near the building entrance. Vivienne's assistant had already called to say someone was outside her condo building in Barrie. 2. A journalist had called the boatyard. Shepard had answered and said only, "He's not in," which was technically true. The registration had been enough to satisfy the clause. It was not going to be enough to withstand a public challenge. I looked at the document on the table. Then at the brass compass in my pocket. Paper had gotten us through the morning. Paper wasn't going to get us through the week. Vivienne stood very still beside the conference table. I picked up her folder and held it out to her. "You needed a fiancé by Saturday," I said. She looked at me. "That was Saturday. This is the part after." She didn't move. "Pack a bag," I told her. "You can stay at the house until this settles." She came to the house that evening. One rolling bag, a garment bag, a tote, with what appeared to be a full second office inside, and the expression of a woman who had spent the entire day managing everyone else's panic and was now standing on my front porch. Trying to look like this was normal. My house sat on the same lot as the boatyard, separated by a cedar fence I needed to replace. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that had seen better decades, a wood stove I'd never bothered to remove, even though the furnace worked fine, and a porch that faced the water. Vivienne stepped inside and did a slow look around. "It's small," I said. I was going to say honest. I showed her the guest room, which had a daybed, a window that stuck in the frame if there'd been humidity, and a closet door that opened if you lifted the handle slightly left. She dropped her tote on the floor and looked at the window. "Does it stick now?" "Check Thursday," I said. She looked at me. "Is this how you welcome all your guests?" "I've never had a guest under these specific circumstances." That first week didn't feel like a partnership. It felt like 2 people from different provinces trying to use the same kitchen without a shared map. Vivienne had lawyers and trust officers calling before 8. I had Curtis calling to ask what to tell the journalists who'd shown up at the Lake Simcoe site, asking questions. I told him to say we were working, and offer them a coffee if they wanted to stand in the cold. Vivienne looked at me over the rim of her mug when I said that. She didn't say anything. At night she spread her work across one side of the kitchen table in neat stacks, while I ate whatever was easiest across from her. She slept in the guest room. I slept in my own bed and lay awake too long. Nothing happened the way people online seem to imagine it. No dramatic declarations. No doors closing meaningfully. Mostly, it was her stepping over my work boots by the back door every morning, and me learning not to put the coffee on until I heard her moving around in the guest room, because she didn't actually want it the moment it was ready. She wanted it 10 minutes later, slightly cooled, in the blue mug, with the chip on the handle that I should have thrown out 2 years ago. She never said she preferred that mug. She just always reached for it. Shepard noticed things. About a week and a half in, Vivienne showed up at the boatyard mid-morning with coffee for everyone. Not from the fancy cafe by the waterfront. From the diner on Dunlop that the crew went to, the one with the paper cups and the cardboard sleeves. She'd asked Curtis the previous afternoon which one they liked. She had the names on the cups. Shepard took his, looked at it, looked at me. She remembered my order from one conversation. "She pays attention," I said. "She's different than I thought." "What did you think?" He shrugged. "Rich problem." "She is a rich problem." "Yeah. But she's paying attention to the right things." That mattered more than I said. A few weeks in, I took her to see the Holt Lodge. The drive took an hour and a half north into the kind of Ontario landscape that still looked like itself. The lodge sat back from the water on a pine ridge, low and long, original chinked log construction, a covered porch on 3 sides, green metal roof that had been replaced but matched the original roofline. Inside, it smelled like 50 years of wood smoke and cold mornings. The floors were unfinished, the wide planks worn smooth in the paths. People had walked the most. The stone fireplace in the main room ran floor to ceiling and was the most structurally sound thing in the building. Vivienne was quiet while I walked through it. I showed her what I saw. "This chinking here needs to be redone before next winter," I said. "Nothing structural, just weathering. That window sash on the north side has pulled, probably frost heave, it'll need shimming. But this log work? A construction crew in 1962 built this to outlast them. Someone told them to cut corners and they didn't." She was listening in the way she always listened now, not waiting for a pause to speak. Actually in it. At one point I pressed my palm against a log near the fireplace and said, "The people who tell you to tear this out and start fresh either don't know what they're looking at or don't want to." Vivienne looked at me for a second. My grandmother used to say that the lodge had better manners than most people she'd ever met. She mean? What did she mean? "It always made room for you," she said. "It never asked you to be smaller." I didn't have an answer for that. I just turned back to the north window and made a note. After that something changed between us. Or maybe the distance between us changed. Which is a different thing. At the house, she started quietly fixing the small gaps in my client emails. "You sound like you're doing them a favor," she said one evening, pointing at my laptop. "I am doing them a favor. They're paying you to do them a favor." Different. I read what she'd changed. I still sounded like myself. I just sounded like a version of myself that wouldn't make someone defensive before the job even started. "How did you do that?" I asked. "I've been in rooms where tone decided everything," she said. "You learn to read it." I fixed the guest room window the next morning. She came in while I was working, handed me a screw I hadn't asked for but did actually need. When I got it open, she stood there for a moment and pushed it up and down twice, just to feel it move. Reginald came back 6 weeks in with a formal challenge. His lawyer filed a question with the trust about the legitimacy of the partnership. Was it a genuine domestic arrangement? Were we actually cohabiting? Was there intent beyond the clause? Vivienne arrived at the meeting with Gordon and 2 inches of organized documentation. I arrived 20 minutes late from a site in Innisfil, still in my work clothes. Brass compass in my jacket pocket, wearing it where everyone could see it, because I had forgotten. It was unusual, and now I no longer cared. Reginald saw it immediately. The questions were careful, and then less careful. Where did we live? How were finances managed? Did we maintain a genuine shared household? Before Vivienne could answer the last one, I leaned forward. "That depends," I said. Reginald's lawyer looked at me. "On what?" "On whether Vivienne stops reorganizing the tools in my truck. I have a system. She thinks it's inefficient. She's probably right, but it's still my system." Mrs. Brennan, across the table, pressed her lips together in a way that wasn't quite a smile. Vivienne looked at the table, but the corner of her mouth moved. It landed the way it did because it was true. She had reorganized my truck. Twice. I'd said nothing, because the second time, I could actually find things. The challenge was dismissed. After, Vivienne and I ended up in the hallway outside the meeting room, while Gordon and Reginald's lawyers filed out. No one watching. Just the 2 of us and the kind of quiet that sits differently when it comes after something real. "You didn't have to make it sound genuine," she said. I looked at her. I didn't make it anything. She turned toward me. There was nothing between us now. No conference table, no clause, no legal reason to be standing close. "Finn," she said. It was the first time she'd said my name in a room where no one else was listening. I didn't get to say anything. She stepped close, put her hand flat against my chest, and kissed me. It was quiet and it was certain, and it was not for Reginald, or the trust, or anyone who might have been watching through a window. It was the first thing since she walked onto that dock that belonged only to us. We didn't make a speech about it. On the drive home, she sat in my truck instead of taking her car. Her shoulder was a few inches from mine, and every red light on Dunlop felt like it lasted longer than it should have. When we got back to the house, she set her bag on the kitchen chair and stood there, and I understood that the moment was waiting on me to decide what kind of man I was going to be. I hung my jacket by the door. We shouldn't rush this just because a government office got there first, I said. She exhaled slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. Don't look relieved. I'm not relieved, she said. I'm just tired of things happening to me instead of being chosen by me. So we did it the way that made sense. Slowly and on our own terms. She stayed in the guest room for another few weeks. I still made bad coffee. She still fixed my emails without being asked and pretended she was only doing it for the business. But now, when she moved past my chair in the kitchen, her hand touched my shoulder. When I got back late from a job, she looked up from her work like she'd been listening for the door, and then looked away like she hadn't. Some nights we sat on the porch after dinner, the boatyard quiet behind the cedar fence, and talked about nothing Reginald could use against us. The partnership stopped feeling like a filing. It became habit, then preference, then something I couldn't picture dismantling. Reginald kept filing questions with the trust administrator for another month. Each one came back the same way. The arrangement was legitimate. The clause was satisfied. The governance stood. The lodge was not going anywhere. Vivienne had what she needed to move forward with the Holt Cove restoration plan. My company picked up the boatyard work on the lodge dock, which Curtis said was either the most professional outcome of a strange situation or the least professional, depending on how you looked at it. I looked at it as honest work with people I trusted, and I let that be enough. One evening in October, I came home from a job in Penetanguishene and found Vivienne at the kitchen table. No laptop, no papers, just one folder sitting closed in front of her. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and an old boatyard hoodie I hadn't seen in 6 months and had assumed I'd lost. Her hair was down. She looked calm in the way she looked when she'd already had the difficult part of a conversation with herself and was ready for the rest. I knew what the folder was before I sat down. She pushed it toward the chair across from her. Dissolution agreement, she said. Shh. Gordon drafted it. I had an independent lawyer review it. Your business is protected. The boatyard property is protected. Your equipment, everything. There's no penalty and no required public statement. I looked at the folder. You rehearsed that. Several times. How many? More than I'd like to admit. I pulled out the chair and sat down. She kept going before I could speak. The trust clause has been satisfied and upheld. Reginald's last challenge was dismissed. Holt Cove is stable. You did everything I asked, and more than I had any reasonable right to ask for. I watched her hold herself together. I don't want you staying, because this started as an obligation, and you're too decent to walk out before it's resolved. I looked at her. Is that what you think is happening? I think, she said carefully, that you are loyal, and I think sometimes loyal people confuse staying with choosing. That landed somewhere I didn't expect. I opened the folder. First page. Names, dates, registration number, a clean legal path out of something that had become anything but clean. My brass compass was sitting on the table beside my keys. She'd seen me put it there. She'd been looking at it while she waited for me. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. No. She looked at me. No, I said. You came to my dock and asked me for the truth. I asked you for the same thing before I said yes. So here's mine. I don't want out, I said. I don't want my half of the table back. I don't want to hear about the lodge from someone else. I don't want to wonder which mug you would have reached for. I don't want to take that compass out of my pocket and pretend it was just a practical stand-in for something we were performing. Her eyes went bright. I was trying to be fair to you, she said. I know. You had a quieter life before this. I had a smaller one, I said. Not the same thing. She looked at the folder. Then she pushed it further away. I don't want out either, she said. And that was the moment the arrangement ended. Not in a government office, not in front of Mrs. Brennan, not because a clause date expired. It ended at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in October, with rain coming off Kempenfelt Bay and Vivienne Holt wearing my boatyard hoodie, and finally saying the things she had driven up here to give me the choice to hear. Write in the comments. Was Vivienne right to give me a way out? Or should she have trusted that I was staying because I actually chose to? After that, life didn't become simpler. It became ours. The lodge restoration moved into its first phase the following spring. Shepard ran the dock rebuild. Curtis handled the boathouse structural work. I spent most of May on site in that pine smell my father would have loved. Vivienne ran Holt Cove with the kind of steadiness that had always been in her, just without the performance around it now. She learned which fights to take to the board and which ones to let become irrelevant on their own. She learned that old buildings tell you what they need if you stop talking over them. I learned that the emails she rewrote for me were better than mine, and I stopped pretending otherwise. A year later, we had a real ceremony at the lodge. Not announced publicly, not catered. Just the people who had been in it with us from the beginning. Shepard stood near the fireplace and looked like a man who had known. This was coming before either of us did. Curtis wore a jacket that looked like it had lost an argument with him that morning, but showed up anyway. Vivienne walked in without the camel blazer, without the leather folder, without the careful distance she used to keep between herself and any room she wasn't certain of. When it was over, we stood by the tall window in the main room, while the light came off the water through the pines and made the old floor look like it had been waiting for exactly this. She leaned into my side like it was where she'd always meant to be. When people asked later how it started, she always answered first. I needed a fiancé by Saturday, she would say, and then I would tell them the rest.